This story is part of the Campfire Chronicles written by Tobias D. Title. The Wendigo's Call Part 1. The campfire crackled, sending orange sparks into the chilly autumn air. The smell of pine and damp leaves filled the night, but the atmosphere around the fire was heavy, as though something unseen lurked beyond the ring of light. 5 campers, huddled close, listened as the oldest of the group, a man named Jack, began his story. "Have you ever heard of the Wendigo?" Jack asked, his voice low and deliberate, cutting through the stillness of the forest. The others shifted uncomfortably. A couple of them chuckled nervously, but none responded. Jack leaned in, the firelight casting shadows on his weathered face. The Wendigo is an ancient creature, born from starvation and desperation. It's from the old legends of the indigenous tribes up here, the Algonquins mostly. They said it could possess people, turn them into monsters. Hungry, always hungry, flesh eaters. He paused to let the weight of his words sink in. "I heard the story from my grandfather," Jack continued. "He was a trapper, spent a lot of time up here in the northern forests, where the wind cuts through the trees and the nights can freeze you solid if you're not careful. He used to tell me that in the dead of winter, people could lose themselves out here. Snowstorms, starvation, isolation, it does something to your mind. And that's when the Wendigo comes." The fire popped loudly, startling one of the younger campers. She laughed it off, but her eyes were wide as she glanced nervously into the darkness. Jack grinned, though it was more unsettling than reassuring. "They say the Wendigo is always watching, waiting for you to grow desperate. It can make you hallucinate, make you see things that aren't there. Hear things." His voice grew quieter, but the worst part, the Wendigo is said to call out in a voice you recognize. It mimics people you know, your loved ones, trying to draw you deeper into the woods. And when you answer its call, you're lost. One of the campers, a man named Ben, shook his head. "Sounds like a bunch of old folktales to me. What's the Wendigo supposed to look like anyway?" Jack's expression darkened. "That depends. Some say it's a tall, emaciated figure, with skin stretched so tight over its bones that it looks like a corpse. Others say it's more animal than man, with antlers like a stag and eyes that glow in the dark. But everyone agrees on one thing, it's always hungry. No matter how much it eats, it's never satisfied." A long silence followed. The fire seemed to burn lower, the surrounding trees leaning closer, their branches creaking in the wind. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper as he leaned in further. "Some say that if you hear the Wendigo's call, it's already too late. It's coming for you." The fire crackled louder, and the weight of Jack's words seemed to settle into the group like a blanket of dread. The campers exchanged uneasy glances. The wind picked up, stirring the trees, creating eerie whispers that sent chills down their spines. Ben broke the silence, his voice shaky but forced into a casual tone. "All right, Jack, you've got us all spooked. But come on, we're in the middle of the 1980s, not some ancient wilderness. I think we'll be just fine." Jack leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving Ben's. "You think that?" he muttered, almost to himself. "But this forest has seen things. Old things. Things that don't care about what year it is." Suddenly, a high-pitched scream echoed through the trees, startling the group. The noise was unnatural, too sharp, too prolonged to be an animal. The campers froze, each one holding their breath. Ben stood up, his head jerking toward the sound. "What the hell was that?" he asked, eyes wide, scanning the dark forest around them. Jack remained calm, though his eyes narrowed as he stared into the distance, toward where the sound had come from. "Probably just a coyote," he said, though his tone was far from reassuring. The scream came again, this time closer. It wasn't a coyote, it wasn't even a human scream. It was something worse, a sound so piercing and otherworldly that it seemed to vibrate through their bones. "Maybe it's just the wind," offered Lisa, another one of the campers, though she didn't seem to believe her own words. She clutched her jacket tighter around herself, glancing nervously at Jack. Jack shook his head slowly. I've spent too many nights in these woods to mistake that for the wind. Ben, trying to shake off the unease creeping up his spine, snorted. You're messing with us, Jack. This is just some spooky campfire story, right? Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and grabbed a thick branch, prodding at the fire, making the flames dance higher. His face was illuminated again, casting long shadows across his eyes. I wish it was just a story, he said quietly, but my grandfather told me about something like this, about hearing strange cries in the woods at night. He told me that's how it starts. The wind howled through the trees, the branches above them creaking like they were alive, bending in ways they shouldn't. There was a stillness beneath the wind, a heaviness, as though the very air around them was holding its breath. Another scream, louder this time, closer. The sound ripped through the forest, sending birds flying from the treetops. The campers all stood now, huddled together, their eyes darting into the dark abyss surrounding them. The fire felt like their only protection, its light flickering as if threatened by the encroaching darkness. We should go back to the cars, said Sarah, one of the more soft-spoken campers. This doesn't feel right, we should leave. Ben rolled his eyes, trying to hide the growing fear that was gnawing at his insides. We're not leaving because of some weird noises. It's probably just animals. Suddenly, the branches in the trees behind them snapped, the sharp crack like a gunshot in the still night. They all turned at once, eyes wide, straining to see what had caused the noise. But there was nothing, just the thick darkness beyond the firelight, the trees swaying ominously in the wind. Then, from the shadows, came a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the breeze. The voice was unmistakable, though, a soft, pleading tone that sent shivers down their spines. Help me, it called. Please. Sarah gasped and turned toward the sound. That's Emily's voice, she cried, her face pale. Emily, Sarah's younger sister, had stayed behind at the campsite, not feeling well enough to join the campfire gathering. She's hurt, we have to go find her. Jack grabbed her arm before she could move. No, he said firmly, that's not her. Sarah's eyes were wide, frantic. What do you mean that's not her? I know my sister's voice. I told you, Jack said, his voice low. The Wendigo can mimic voices. It can make you hear things you want to hear. It's trying to lure you out there. The group stood frozen, torn between belief and skepticism. Another call echoed from the darkness, closer this time. Help me, please. Sarah tried to pull away from Jack's grip. What if you're wrong? She cried. What if she's really in trouble? Jack shook his head, his face grim. If you go out there, you'll be the one in trouble. The wind howled louder now, and the fire sputtered, threatening to die as the voice continued to plead from the shadows. And in the distance, just out of sight, the faint outline of something tall and thin seemed to move between the trees. The fire crackled weakly, its warmth failing to chase away the creeping cold that settled over the camp. The campers were now huddled in a tight circle, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. Sarah pulled against Jack's grip, her eyes darting toward the forest's edge where the voice had come from. Let go of me, she hissed, her voice frantic. That's my sister, I have to help her. Jack's grip only tightened. If you go out there, you'll never come back. That's not Emily, it's the Wendigo. Ben stepped forward, glaring at Jack. This is insane. You're seriously going to stand here and tell us some monster is out there pretending to be her sister? Come on, man. But even as Ben spoke, his voice wavered. The eerie atmosphere, the unexplainable screams, and now the haunting voice had shaken him. He was trying to hold on to logic, but it was slipping through his fingers, just like the warmth of the fire. Jack looked at Ben, his face lined with grim determination. I didn't believe it either, not at first. But my grandfather's stories weren't just tall tales. The Wendigo isn't just some legend, it's real. And once you hear its call, it's already watching you. It's waiting for you to make a mistake. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. So what are we supposed to do? Just sit here while my sister, while whatever that is, keeps calling for help? Jack shook his head. No, we have to stay by the fire. It won't come near the light. It preys on the lost and desperate. But if we stick together, if we don't listen to its voice, we'll be safe. The voice echoed again from the trees, closer now. Please, help me. Sarah shuddered, turning away from the sound. Lisa, who had been quiet for most of the night, stepped closer to the fire, her face pale and her arms wrapped tightly around her body. What if it's not the Wendigo? What if someone really needs help? We can't just ignore it. Jack's eyes darkened. That's exactly what it wants you to think. It'll lure you out there, make you wander deeper into the woods, and once you're far enough away from the fire, from the light, it'll take you. Ben shook his head again, though his confidence had noticeably faltered. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say this thing is real. What does it want?